upside down in the textbook. Told us sit still while they pick through the checkbooks. Fed us their script, called it civic religion. Signed our names on a fraud permission. Talk to beg when we already own it. Talk to bow to a rubber stamp moment. But under all the spin, under all that gloss, on the wrong path, yeah, we're the boss. We were taught the wrong thing. By design, now we're walking the right way. On our time, we the people. Calling every shot, step one, step up. This is all we got. We were taught the wrong thing. Set the pace. We the people in the doorway, not the cage. From the courthouse doors to the hometown streets. We the boss on our feet. Step one, put the truth in the sunlight. Grand jury in each room where they hide files tight. Every seal box and backroom deal. Let the neighbors see what is fake and what is real. Step two, ink dries on the ordinances. Plain speech, law built from our witness. Front row, small town, hands up for the vote. Every A, every nay, every face we know. Step three, not a game, not fiction. Constitution in the back, that's the mission. Militia on the land means hearts on guard. Every farmer, every teacher, every work scar palm. We were taught the wrong thing. By design, now we're walking the right way. On our time, we the people. Calling every shot, step one, step up. This is all we got. We were taught the wrong thing. Set the pace. We the people in the doorway, not the cage. From the courthouse doors to the hometown streets. We the boss on our feet. They drew the lines, we draw them back. They wrote the rules, we read the facts. 3 steps forward, none in reverse. We the people break that curse. We were taught the wrong thing. By design, now we're walking the right way. On our time, we the people. Calling every shot, step one, step up. This is all we got. We were taught the wrong thing. Loud and clear, we the people in the front row. We are here from the courthouse doors to the hometown streets. We the boss on our feet. Oh.
And who's the boss? We the boss. Go ahead, Miss Jeanette, if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely. Let's bow our heads and go to the throne of God for prayer. But first, I'm going to read Psalm 51:10. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Father God, we come to your throne with this request. Keep our hearts steadfast in you. Father, we praise you and thank you for all of these that have assembled here tonight. Their steadfast faith in you, their steadfast commitment to the work and Tactical Civics, which becomes, first of all, a joy and a witness about Jesus, our Savior, and God, our Father, and Holy Spirit. Father, open our hearts, open our minds. Let us receive all that is presented tonight that we can use in the mission that we serve you and provide the hope in the hearts of those that are looking for reasons to go on with life sometimes in this crazy, crazy world. Father, you receive all of the glory and the praise, and all of his children said, amen and amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jeanette.
Amen.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to The Egg. And glad to have you here. The Egg presents The Egg. You can find The Egg on Wednesday evenings at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can also find our previous recordings on YouTube and Rumble. The Egg is presented by volunteer members of Tactical Civics. The views and opinions expressed are those of the individual contributors and do not necessarily reflect the official position of Tactical Civics. And presenting our egg carton here. This is a new meme that Penny has put together for us, and it has all of our egg folks on it. We're very proud. We love it because it makes us all look young and beautiful. And every Wednesday night, we do have The Egg. Their first Wednesday of the month is Stepping into the Constitution with Michael Gordon. You can find him at Educate, Grow, Glorify, Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern, or 8 p.m. Eastern. And then the second Wednesday of the month is Of Historical Importance with Martin Holtz. You can catch him also at Educate, Grow, Glorify. The third Wednesday of the month is America's Foundation, the Forefathers Monument with Carolyn Voss and Aaron Lee. And the fourth Wednesday of the month is Pathway to the Forefathers Monument with Patrick Locke. We have a new contact number for The Egg. You can use this number to leave questions or comments, or if you want to be on our text reminder list or anything else that you have concerning Tactical Civics, please put this in your phone book and you can use it anytime. We can send you text messages. You can send us text messages. We have our book studies every week now when we rise on Thursday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern with Ed Gonzalez. Catch him at zoomflorida.com. We also have Now When We Rise Thursday evenings at 9 p.m. with Marty Bonner at zoomwashington.com. Friday evenings, we have Grand Jury Awake with Rich Anderson at 10 p.m. Eastern at zoomalaskatc.com. We have Dawn Betha Monday mornings with Start Over America at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Catch her at zoomtcdawn.com. And Start Over America Tuesday evenings with Dale and Carolyn Voss at ZoomTC Illinois. That's 7 p.m. Central Time. And we have the Ready Constitution book study with Stacy Marisek. This is a good one, folks, from 6:30 to 7:30 Tuesday evenings. Catch her there. And on Wednesday evenings, we have Consent to the Govern with Dawn Betha just before our egg program at zoomtcdawn.com, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And we have David Coffey with The Banished Bureaucrat. He is on Friday evenings from 5:30 to 6:30 Eastern Time, and you can find him at zoomtcgeorgia.com. And we have fellowship and prayer almost every single day of the week, Sundays, Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. For more information about those prayer fellowships and prayers, please check out the Tactical Civics Training Center at the member section. We have Liberty Lab every Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. Most people are familiar with Liberty Lab. If you don't know the address to get there, please check out the members section of the Tactical Civics Training Center. You'll find that there. Project America 125. Need to get your state activated today at projectamerica125.com/activate. Every Monday night, Marilyn and Donnie have their update with Project America 125. Catch them at 7 p.m. Eastern Time at zoomalabama.com. The mission of Tactical Civics is to glorify Jesus Christ and maintain our civilization by living like responsible adults, enforcing what we stipulate in our Constitution. And for anyone who is interested, we have a QR code that you can use to get to the Tactical Civics website. And if you aren't able to click on this QR code at this time, you will find that one of our hosts in our gallery will have that QR code up on their picture. Tonight, we have Martin Holtz with of Historical Importance, Story Behind the Miracle, and Part 2, Colonization of Multiple Nations. Looking forward to our presentation tonight. Thank you, Carolyn, and I'll let you take it from there.
Okay. Hello, all. And do we have any guests tonight? Raise your hand if we have any guests, new members that have never been at the egg before. Would you raise your hand? Okay. Jamie, would you unmute yourself?
Hello.
Where are you from?
I'm from Georgia. I know Michael Gordon.
Okay. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And Otto, I think, is a new member. Where's Otto? Would you unmute yourself? I think okay. He may not. Anybody else, new member or a guest tonight? If you are, unmute yourself, and if you want to raise your Cammie?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi.
And
I'm Cammie Sanchez, and I am in Marietta, Georgia. It's my first time being here. It sounds wonderful.
Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anybody else? That's it? Okay. At this time, I'm going to turn this over to Marty. And remember, if you've got any comments, he will take questions and answers later. But if you got any comments, put them over in the chat. And he will say, let's discuss that if he's got the time in that. So please put it over there, else he'll look at it and say, okay, I like this comment. So please use that chat, guys. Thanks again for joining us. Marty, thanks again for doing this tonight. It's all yours.
All righty. Welcome, everyone. I just shared my presentation, and we'll start from there. I used this meme that Penny developed from a quote or from a phrase that I gave her, and it says across the top, America requires character. Well, how can we get our character or our virtue back? And the only way is through the truth of the gospel and the foundation of the Christian scriptures. So that's where we start, and hopefully that's where we end. And that's how we get our government back in order, as we know. All right. So tonight, like it was said, this is part 2 of the background of the settlement of the colonies. that produced the Constitution and our Republic. It's entitled Multiple Nations, as the principal outline and material about the peoples who immigrated to the New World is derived from the incredible book American Nations by Colin Woodard. And it is most of the outline and most of the organizations coming out of there. But of course, I've read a lot of books, so I've added a lot of those other things as well. We're not quite finished with the initial explorations and claims, though, which sets the scene basically for our colonization. So I'll review last month's story and then proceed from there. Here is a video clip to help set the content for that. Go ahead, Penny.
What if the biggest turning point in world history began as a
Not
navigation
hearing the
problem
sound.
and a misunderstanding?
Oh, wait.
No sound on the video?
You can hear it.
Yeah, we can hear it. I could hear it.
In 1492, Columbus sailed west chasing Asia, spices, gold, a shortcut to power. He reached land and called it the Indies, but what he actually set in motion would remake maps, empires, and entire lives forever before Europe. First, a reality check. America was not an empty continent waiting to be found. Long before European sails appeared on the horizon, hundreds of nations lived across these lands, building cities, farming, trading, governing, and shaping cultures as old and complex as any in Europe. So when people say discovered, what they really mean is this: Europe reconnected the world by sea on terms it would try to control. Chapter 2. Why sail west? By the late 1400s, Europe was hungry economically and politically. Spices preserved food. Silk signaled status. Gold funded armies. But reaching Asia was expensive and dangerous overland. A sea route meant leverage, faster trade, bigger profits, and, most importantly, power. In that moment, the ocean stopped being a boundary and became a wager. Chapter 3. The pitch. Columbus arrived with a promise: sail west, reach Asia faster. His math was wrong. He underestimated the distance, but confidence can be persuasive, especially when kingdoms want miracles. Spain approved the gamble because empires don't always expand with perfect information. Sometimes they expand with perfect ambition. Chapter 4. Crossing the Atlantic. The voyage was not heroic every day. Most days were monotony and fear. Weeks passed with nothing but water and sky, an endless horizon that made men doubt their captains and their gods. Supplies dwindled, tensions rose, mutiny became a whisper, then a threat. And Columbus, whether stubborn or terrified, could not turn back, because returning empty-handed didn't just mean failure, it meant becoming a cautionary tale. Chapter 5. Landfall. On October 12, 1492, a lookout cried the word everyone had been waiting for: land. Columbus believed he had reached islands near Asia, but he had arrived in the Caribbean, into a world already inhabited, already alive, already named by the people who lived there. The first meetings were cautious. Gifts were exchanged. Curiosity traveled both ways. And behind the smiles, history quietly shifted into a new direction. Chapter 6. Not Asia, and the name America. Very quickly, more voyages followed. Coastlines were traced, reports were written, and a question grew louder. If this isn't Asia, what is it? Some explorers argued it was a new world, a separate continent, Cartographers began updating their maps accordingly. Within years, a new label appeared on European charts, America. And the blank West disappeared, but connection came with consequences. Disease, conquest, and upheaval on a scale no one could fully predict. Closing. So the story isn't simply who discovered America. It's how one voyage, chasing a shortcut, linked continents, rewrote maps, and triggered transformations that still shape the modern world. The ocean didn't just carry ships, it carried history.
Unmute, Martin.
Martin, you're muted still.
Sometimes these little gremlins get, there you go, I think you're good.
Yeah, I had a little trouble. I had shared my screen and then I couldn't get back to it. Let me see if I can share again now. Okay, I think we've got it now. Not quite. All right. As I said, tonight's part 2 of the nations. And I want to review just a couple of things before we get into the meat of what I want to talk about tonight. This next slide shows the Portuguese colonial empire. The video was talking about this a little bit. I just wanted to point this out for context and history. Portugal, little small country on the west side of Hispaniola, or the Spanish Peninsula. They got organized because they got the Muslim invaders out fairly early, so they were organized as a kingdom about 1130. So they had kind of a head start on everyone when the Muslims, the Mamluks, the Berbers, the Mamluks, the Ottomans were blocking and extorting the trade, if you will, which prompted Europeans who had gotten used to it through the Viking trade that we talked about before and through the Venetian trade after and during the Crusades. The Arabs were trading along the coast of India and over to Indonesia and China and bringing the wares over here and selling them to the Venetians and the Vikings, but they were marking things up, and increasingly the Mamluks and the Ottomans were blocking it completely. So the Portuguese were the first to explore the sea routes, and very quickly in the process, they discovered Madeira Island, they discovered the Azores, they discovered Cape Verde, and onward, and basically set the stage for the next step toward the New World, toward the Western Hemisphere, and what all happened there. The real importance, the last thing I want to point out in this slide is, at Madeira Island, the Portuguese found out that sugarcane would grow very well, but they needed a labor force. Sugarcane takes very intensive but unskilled labor to grow the sugarcane, harvest the sugarcane, crush it, and get the juice out, and then evaporate all the moisture and collect the sugar. It's a tedious, labor-intensive process. They needed help. They needed people. They tried enslaving all the natives in Madeira, and they killed them off pretty quick. Now, the Portuguese at the same time had been trading down along African coast and had gotten involved with African slavery. And that's one reason why they took over this whole area that's purple down here, so that they could tap into the slave trade. They discovered that black African slaves worked out as a labor force for the Madeira sugarcane, and the plantation system using black African slave labor was developed first in Madeira and then eventually traveled to the sugarcane islands of the British Empire, most notably Barbados, and from there to South Carolina. And that is how slavery came to the Americas, if you will. You'll notice here there's these two lines over here. This is a line of longitude on both sides of the globe that in 1494 was declared by the Pope to split the world and new possessions between the Portuguese and the Spanish. And in so doing, they suppressed a lot of other explorers. They also suppressed the fact that the Vikings were already up in North America here, and by the 1450s, they were still, though they were fading, they were still trading. And that was all suppressed by the Vatican because they had in their sights splitting the whole world up between these two Roman Catholic entities. You can see by the Portuguese Empire, they followed the lines very loosely. This is the Portuguese area here in the middle, and then the Spanish area around the rest of the world, or the other half of the globe. And you see that this is all Portuguese territory over here, Portuguese territory over in South America, where Brazil spread out over a third of the continent. And so they didn't follow it too closely. The next slide here, as I go to the next slide, this is the Spanish colonial empire. Spain was next. Spain finally tossed or conquered the last Moorish state and kicked the last Muslim prince out of the Spanish peninsula and united the two larger portions of Spain, Aragon and Castile, by a marriage between Ferdinand and Isabella in 1491. In 1492, Columbus convinced them to support a mission sailing west to the New World, and that started it all off. Oh, I wanted to point out here, notice that our North American areas are really on the fringes of the Spanish possessions, the Spanish Empire, the Spanish conquistadors' victories down here in South America and in Middle America and in Mexico. There were a couple of explorers that went into the North American area, but they didn't find the seven cities of gold, and they didn't find mines, and they didn't find great Indian civilizations and riches to conquer, so they were just on the fringes of the colonial effort. Here are Columbus's 4 voyages. As I talked about last week, Columbus knew that the Vikings had already discovered the land to the north because he had traveled to Iceland on another cruise in maybe the 1480s and wintered in Iceland. So he was exposed to the sagas. He was exposed to all the stories from Greenland, and he probably had a map that showed him that the Vikings were in Newfoundland or in the new area anywhere. So he ventured west and sort of southwest. It took him 37 days on his first voyage. First voyage is in blue here. And he made landfall somewhere in the Bahamas chain here at an island that today is called San Salvador, because that's what Columbus named it. But I spent some time in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and there are people there that claim up and down that Columbus's landfall was actually at Grand Turk Island, and it kind of fits the descriptions. And later on, it was discovered on the Caicos Bank, on the reef, a shipwreck from 15th century Spanish extraction. They could date it by the artifacts, and particularly the anchors. And it could very well be the Pinta, which was lost on a subsequent voyage of Columbus in that area. So just little interesting sides there. So Columbus set this up. He touched on South American continental landmass here on his third voyage. And on his fourth voyage, he actually made it to Central America and established that all this territory and mapped it. But we also know that Columbus did not discover America, and that there were a lot of people here before him, really. We talked about that last time. We won't go into it this time. Okay, what about England at this time, and how did we come about speaking English, really? How did we come about having all these colonies of English-speaking peoples along the eastern seaboard? Initially, in 1492, when Columbus published his discoveries, England was still pretty distracted because of all the external and internal wars, and they were really too weak because they had just recently had the Wars of the Roses, an internal civil war between two houses for the crown, had just completed at about this time, 1487 to be exact. Henry the Seventh, or Henry the Seventh, took over the kingdom and won the war, but he was still consolidating. However, there were things going on in England. There was a lot of economic activity, and by the end of the century, the Tudors, as you see here, were setting the stage, and Henry the Seventh contracted with John Cabot, or Giovanni Caboto in Italian, and his three sons, given letters of patent to explore west and north of England across the Atlantic, looking for the Northwest Passage and a shorter route to the New World as well. You say all that, but in reality, fishermen out of Bristol, which was the second largest port in England, had been sailing west across the Atlantic to the fishing banks off of Newfoundland for at least 50 years and probably 100. And they weren't the only ones. The Venetians, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, they were all sending fishing boats off of the coast of Newfoundland. They were known and exploited. So anyway, Penny, let's play the next video, and we'll talk about John Cabot's voyages.
In many ways, John Cabot is the reason why so many people speak English today in North America.
John Cabot, by being sponsored by King Henry VII of England, allowed the English to make a claim for all of North America.
John Cabot was born Giovanni Caboto in Genoa, Italy around 1450. He learned how to sail and navigate while working for a Venetian trading company.
In his early years, John Cabot claimed that he had vast experience sailing the Mediterranean basin and exploring, and he even claimed he got as far as Mecca.
There was great demand in Europe for Asian silks and spices, and at that time, the only way to get them was by going east from Europe and paying middlemen who controlled this route.
Upon hearing the news of Columbus's successful voyage to what we call today the New World, John Cabot realized that there were opportunities to pioneer another more northerly route around the territories Columbus had discovered to reach Asia by a water route.
By 1495, Cabot moved to England and successfully convinced Henry VII to finance his idea of finding a new water route to Asia.
After Cabot left Bristol in May of 1497, he sails a northern route across the Atlantic Ocean. John Cabot makes his first landfall in North America, somewhere near Newfoundland or Labrador, and he immediately claims this land for his sponsor, King Henry VII of England.
Cabot thought he had discovered a more northerly and a shorter route to Asia than the one that Columbus had found.
Upon his return to England, Cabot was warmly received by King Henry VII, and in less than a year was granted another larger expedition by the king.
Cabot left Bristol in May of 1498. They do more extensive exploring than he'd been able to do in 1497, and they decide to return home before the water got too cold, before the ice encroached.
He runs into a number of storms, and he is never officially heard from again.
John Cabot should be remembered for two prime reasons. First, he allowed the English to lay claim to much of North America. Second, his crew brought home 3 Inuit men clad in furs who within a couple of years were dressed like Englishmen, speaking English, and convinced the English that the native peoples of North Americas could be transformed into Englishmen.
Okay, so John Cabot set the stage and set the situation whereby the English could claim the entire northeastern seaboard from basically what is now South Carolina clear up to Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia. Didn't find the Gulf of St. Lawrence, didn't find the St. Lawrence River north of that, but established the English claim, which eventually led to all the 13 colonies along the eastern seaboard and the predominance of the English language. So he affected us pretty directly. Let me get my share going here. Show you here, this is the first voyage. His other 2 voyages came in the same area. It's possible that he landed in Newfoundland on the second voyage because he had a pastor, a priest, and some colonist that supposedly he landed there. There's also some stories that he may have landed there himself, but none of that is verified. No colony survived, but the claim was made. All right, so now we're getting to the real settlement of North America by nations. The first thing I want to say is that David Zuniga says over and over that and castigates us for using the term nation, and he's right. We're not a nation. We're actually 11 nations. When you define nation as a group of people who share or believe they share a common culture, worldview, ethnic origin, language, experience, artifacts, and symbols. In other words, a people group. We kind of talk about people groups today. This is the same as a nation, not a political entity. There's a lot of current nations today that are stateless, like the Kurds, which are in 3 different countries, 3 different states. The Palestinians, which are, you got to classify them as a nation now because that's how they think of themselves. They're really a subculture. The Quebecois in Canada, Native Americans, natives in Canada as well. And to complete the definition of state then is a sovereign political entity eligible to join the UN. Some are single nation states like France, Germany, Japan, etc. But many are multinational states like Belgium, the UK, Switzerland, Canada, Ukraine, Russia, China, and USA. Americans are among the only people that use state, nation, and country interchangeably. And we're probably not going to change that. But there are origins of each of these words and shades of meanings in each. So, I'm not going to castigate anybody for calling America a nation, but we're really not a nation. We're a conglomerate of a bunch of nations, and we are a republic if you're talking about political coordination, or we are a country because of our shared borders and interests and understandings. Okay, this book, The American Nations by Colin Woodard, is a very fascinating study. It follows from a lot of previous theories, a lot of previous teachings. It's so far beyond what we were taught in school, though, that it really caught my attention. And it's a really good way to differentiate all the traditions, all the beliefs, all the understandings that the founding fathers held when they met together to create our Constitution. So it's just a good way to show all the context and all the background for our Constitution, which is the whole reason for this. And here's what I'm going to discuss. I want to touch upon basically 9 of these nations, because 2 of them came along long after the Constitution was emplaced. So they didn't really affect the Constitution at all, even indirectly. 3 of these, the first 3 that I'm going to discuss, don't really affect the authorship of the Constitution directly, but certainly did affect indirectly. And we'll see that. Here's the ones I'm going to touch upon again in order. The First Nation. They were here first. The First Nation is all the Native Americans. And they affected every outcome of colonial development. They interacted with every single nation and every single entity that ended up forming states and eventually the United States. They had more of an influence on the culture and the Constitution than most of us realize, and we'll discuss them first. And then secondly and thirdly, we'll discuss El Norte, which is the Spanish settlement, and New France. And we'll discuss them chronologically. Though their influences on the founders and thus the Constitution was indirect, we'll discuss them in their unique culture because they did affect attitudes and decisions in the founders' day and are even more influential today in America. They didn't die away. And finally, the next 6 nations, the exception of New Netherlands, are all subgroups of English-speaking peoples of the later consolidated United Kingdom of Great Britain. Most of these groups had been fighting the English and or each other for 800 years or more. So there's a tradition there, and we'll talk about that individually. Now I want to set the stage here by quoting a little bit from Colin Woodard's book. Let me read. Calls for unity overlook a glaring historical fact. Americans have been deeply divided since the days of Jamestown and Plymouth. The original North American colonies were settled by people from the distinct regions of the British Islands and from France, the Netherlands, and Spain, each with their own religious, political, and ethnographic characteristics. Throughout the colonial period, they regarded one another as competition for land, settlers, and capital, and occasionally as enemies, as was the case during the English Civil War when Royalist Virginia stood against Puritan Massachusetts. That's like in the 1640s. Or when New Netherland and New France were invaded and occupied by English-speaking soldiers, statesmen, and merchants. Only when London began treating its colonies as a single unit and enacted policies threatening to nearly all did some of these distinct societies briefly come together to win a revolution and create a joint government. Nearly all of them would seriously consider leaving the Union in the 80-year period after Yorktown. Several went to war to do so in the 1860s. All of these centuries-old cultures are still with us today and have spread their people, ideas, and influence across mutually exclusive bands of the continent. There isn't and never has been one America, but rather several Americas. Any effort to restore, quote unquote, fundamental American values runs into an even greater obstacle. Each of our founding cultures had its own set of cherished principles, and they often contradicted one another. By the middle of the 18th century, 8 discrete Euro-American cultures had been established on the southern and eastern rims of North America. For generations, these distinct cultural hearths developed in remarkable isolation from one another, consolidating characteristic values, practices, dialects, and ideals. And that's really the case up until the Revolution. Some championed individualism, others utopian social reform. Some believed themselves guided by divine purpose, others championed freedom of conscience and inquiry. Some embraced an Anglo-Saxon Protestant identity, others ethnic and religious pluralism. Some valued equality and democratic participation, others deference to a traditional aristocratic order. All of them continued to champion some version of their founding ideals in the present day. The United States had founding fathers, to be sure, but they were the grandfathers, great-grandfathers, and great-great-grandfathers of the men who met to sign the Declaration of Independence and to draft our first 2 constitutions. Our true founders didn't have an original intent. We can refer back to in challenging times. They had original intents. This is the whole core to Colin Woodard and the book. and that is that these nations were separate cultures that settled our country and eventually our continent, or most of it, but they didn't go away. So I intend to touch on these nations in what is now USA and look deeper into the sixth with direct influence on the founders who wrote the Constitution. It's all good history and provides excellent context for understanding more deeply both the political aspects of the Constitution and the shenanigans we see still going on today. The last line above, the original intent line, is of monumental importance for our understanding of current events, for example. There were opposing views from the very beginning over what the words and intents of parts of the Constitution really meant, and we're still arguing about them, but that's one beautiful thing about the Constitution. It was constructed so that we could do that productively. Something to remember. This is the whole core, though, to Colin's book, and that is that these nations have never gone away. This map that you're seeing right now comes from Colin Woodard. This is basically a map showing voting patterns from county by county election returns on various issues and elections over years. It's pretty obvious that current voting trends expose the fact the American melting pot hasn't really melted very much in fundamental ways. And that's what we really want to discuss. So let's get into the First Nation. Okay, the origin and extent of the First Nation is overall North and South America. Let's talk about the timeline. You know, I was taught in school, and I'm sure most of us were, that the Indians migrated from Siberia over the land bridge during the last ice age. And therefore, because it was postulated that's when there was an open corridor, the maximum age of those peoples in North America and South America would be 12,000 years. This was also partially based on the Clovis people, which were the earliest civilization that they had found at the time, you know, in the 19th century, and the earliest dates they got when they started carbon 12 dating artifacts. Now they're talking 40,000 years and up for the presence of humans. And that's based on the fact that they have found artifacts and bones verified in Chile from 28,000 years ago. Very recently, they found footprints in the White Sands Monument in Arizona that are 23,000 feet, 23,000 years old. And these things are these footprints are contiguous with a giant ground sloth and a mammoth or a mastodon set of footprints as well. Very interesting. 23,000 years ago. Evidently, based on DNA and linguistic evidence, there were at least 3 specific waves of immigrants. There are 3 linguistic groups amongst the Native Americans, but their DNA is remarkably homogeneous, which kind of indicates that maybe they came out of Siberia as one big group and then got isolated for several tens of thousands of years. One group made it through, the other group was isolated, and then a part of that group made it through 10,000 years later, and then a third group after that. But they're also postulating now that maybe they didn't come across an ice-free corridor. Maybe they came down the coast in boats. There were ice-free areas along the coasts the whole time of the last ice age, so that could very well be what's done. And there's also some postulation and some DNA evidence that there were actually some immigrants from Polynesia as well, which is, I think, really interesting. So we were taught in school in the 50s that the European settlers found a practically empty land, and that's just plain not true. starting in the 60s, paralleling the conservation movements. Historical researchers started systematically researching and collecting existing contemporary data, church records of births and deaths and marriages, etc., colonial government records of immigration, land deeds, taxes, troop movements, logistics, trader trips, and goods. A lot of this stuff, as far as the Spanish Empire is concerned, was archived in Spain in a couple of places. And a pattern was recognized pretty quickly. And that pattern showed that pestilence reached native populations in advance of the first physical contact in any locality. It greatly contributed to Europeans taking over the area and conquering the people, because up to 90% of them died of disease, often before the colonials or the Europeans actually got to that area. There were a lot of dense populations along the eastern seaboard, for example. It was reported in 1501 that it was one continuous chain of villages and smoke and people. Several hundred people showing up on the beach to watch a European ship that came in close to shore. Smoke that could be smelled from their fires hundreds of miles out to sea. A lot of people lived along the eastern seaboard. And we're talking in those particular instances, this was reported by Verrazano in 1501 when he sailed up the eastern seaboard between Virginia and Maine. Champlain in 1604, leading a group of French settlers looking for the first place to colonize, passed on setting up a base in Massachusetts and Maine due to too much population there already. The Mississippi Valley in 1542, reported by one of the Spanish expeditions, reported from one village, one could see several other villages all along the whole area. It was all densely populated with villages and fields. The Iroquois Confederation kept both France and England off balance and out of their area for almost 200 years in the Ohio and the Allegheny and Monongahela River valleys in Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, and that whole area. Indians kept early colonists out of lands west of the Appalachians, and then Georgia, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois for many years after the Revolution. Current findings are that repeated epidemics destroyed up to 90% of the Indian population before first actual contact with Europeans. It's mind-boggling. Environmental. It's been found, and it was reported, and now it's starting to pay attention, that the Indians practiced burning across the entire area that became the USA. They burned underbrush and grass once or twice a year. On the eastern seaboard, they burned every fall and every spring. The first colonists reported riding horses and driving carriages through the forest. They were more like parks. Bison were reported occupying lands and forest areas clear up into Maine. And bison don't live where there's underbrush. They eat grass after all. The Great Plains were burned off every spring, and it kept the trees back, it kept the grasslands open and green and fertilized. It killed the weeds. It enabled that deep, nutritious grass that the first settlers found. And the Indians had been encouraging large herbivore environment, buffalo, elk, deer, antelope, by these burnings for hundreds, thousands of years before we got here. The settlers saw the great herds and plenty on the plains and foothills. In particular, Lewis and Clark, when they went up the Missouri River, they lived on elk almost exclusively. They were killing and eating 9, 10, 12 elk a day with their single shot muzzle loaders. And it's amazing the reports of the wildlife on the plains. Along the East Coast, in 1501, Gaspar Corte Real abducted 50 Indians from Maine by rounding them up on their ship and refusing to let them go. Now, to get 50 Indians on your ship, it's pretty obvious that the Indians already had been exposed to Europeans and their ships and were trading, and so didn't have a lot of fear. Anyway, as he was inspecting these people, he found 2 wearing items from Venice, 2 silver rings on one and a broken sword on another one. So it's obvious the Venetians had been there. Of course, they'd been there fishing. Obviously, they had landed and traded with Indians as well. 1523, Verrazano sailed north from the Carolina, and he is the one that was reporting all the coastline, densely populated, smoky with fires. 1605, 1606, Samuel de Champlain passed on establishing a base in Massachusetts and or Maine because it was already too well populated and defended. In 1614, Captain John Smith landed at Patuxet, trading with that village and another village in the areas. Patuxet, you may remember, was the village where Tisquantum or Squanto grew up, and the village that was called Plymouth later on. And we'll get into that. Captain John Smith landed there on 1614. They treated him well. Tisquantum was a boy when this happened. And I might add that Smith, Captain John Smith, this is the same Captain John Smith from Virginia. They were up there in 2 ships exploring and trading with the Indians. Smith returned to England. He drew maps of the areas that he'd seen, and he asked Prince Charles, who became King Charles I, to name the settlements on his maps, and then he published them. And that's how Patuxet became Plymouth, Plimoth. The Pilgrims didn't name it. It was on the map that they had. They had obtained Captain John Smith's book, which is one reason they didn't hire him to be a guide as he wanted them to, is because they had his book and they had his maps. They didn't need him. And that's how they ended up at Plymouth, and that's how they ended up using that name. Tisquantum. Okay. Thomas Hunt, which was Captain John Smith's second ship. Smith went up north to keep trading, and Hunt came back and revisited Patuxet, and he kidnapped 20 Indians, including Tisquantum, and 20 from Patuxet and 7 from the Cape Cod area, and took them to Spain and sold them. There's a whole story about how Tisquantum escaped slavery thanks to the Spanish priests, and then eventually made his way to England. Spent quite some time in England and made his way back to his home village. Now, in 1616, a couple years after this happened, and you might well imagine that the Indians were quite aroused and quite upset over this treachery by the Europeans. So 2 years later, a French ship was wrecked off the coast of Cape Cod, and the survivors got to shore. They built a camp and they built a palisade around it. And the Nassets just kept them surrounded and picked them off one by one from the outside until there were only 5 left. They captured those 5 and they sent them to groups or villages that had been victimized by the kidnappers. So obviously they sent 1 or more to Patuxet. Another French ship, same year, the year after, anchored in Boston Harbor, and the Massachusetts Indians killed everybody on the ship, set the ship on fire. By 16, the problem was that the Frenchmen spread pestilence amongst these Indians. The Frenchmen apparently had, or their goods, their food, had hepatitis A, viral hepatitis infected. And the Indians had no defense against it. And it created what was called, between 1616 and 1619, was described as a cemetery 200 miles long, 40 miles deep. And by the time Tisquantum gets back to his home village, there's nothing there. And he goes under the local chief's protection. And that's how he eventually ended up helping the Pilgrims when they landed there at the village where he had grown up. That no one was there, nothing but skeletons in the fields. So, just to give you an idea, before we get into El Duente, the First Nation, today they are estimating that there were up to 115 million Native Americans populating North and South America in, let's say, 1491, before all this started. And the Valley of Mexico, where the Aztec Empire was centered, had a population of something like 25 million. It was the most densely populated area known in the world at that time. Compare that with the fact that Portugal and Spain at this time, between the two of them, didn't have 10 million people. So it's just amazing what the population was. And it's just amazing what the pestilence has done to these people. And then on top of that, all the contributions that the Indians made to us, the foodstuffs, for example, not just tobacco, but potatoes, tomatoes, beans, gourds, peppers, all came from the Indians. And the most amazing thing is maize. And maize, they don't even know how that was developed. The scientists cannot find a wild version of maize. The closest thing to it's a wild grass with these little tiny pods on it, and they still haven't figured out quite how they could create maize out of it. But maize, corn, as we call it now, is the highest producing grain worldwide every year by a large margin. So and one more thing I wanted to touch on before we go on here. I've lost my slide. I don't know where it is. But one thing I wanted to go on here is that the Indians, when the Europeans are first meeting them, the Indians were a head taller than all the Europeans. And the Europeans were, all these wild-haired, wild-bearded people. They were smaller than the Indians. The Indians had a more nutritious diet, so they were actually in better shape than the Europeans. The Indians had a lot of personal grooming habits. They bathed, they groomed themselves, they combed their hair, they plucked their beards, and they had personal hygiene. And they're meeting Europeans that some of them probably had never had a bath in their lives. And well, okay, maybe one just before they get married. So there's just a huge contrast here. And we'll talk more about that as well. All right. So then we can go into the next group, which is El Norte. Now, the First Nations now, of course, reside mostly in Canada. and on reservations in the United States. And so they're a nation without a state. El Norte, the imprint of old Spain on the American scene. It's the oldest European subculture in the United States, in northern New Mexico, southern Colorado. One aspect is fiercely Roman Catholic, hierarchical. They were on a mission to convert the inhabitants and teach good morals, a lot of the religious justifications. They established missions to convert natives and train them into Spanish culture. The Indians were called neophytes till they were theoretically fully acculturated and trained. They were to take over their mission, which was to become their vision, their village, whenever they were fully ready. But the friars who were running the missions never gave them up because they were making profits and they were living well. And so the Indians were basically kept in virtual slavery. The areas, well, Spain, obviously had been the first most successful of the explorers and discoverers in the New World, as we'd seen. Incredible riches, vast lands, big enterprises in the rich areas. But the areas in the future USA weren't rich in silver and gold, so exploration and settlement was very slow, and there were some other reasons for that too we'll talk about. There was no private enterprise, for example. It was all directed by the king. It was all centralized, bureaucratized. El Norte was a borderland to the empire, late to be explored and exploited, always poverty-stricken in terms of population, resources, and supplies, and was on the edge of the empire. Therefore, it was developed differently, and people there developed more independence and initiative than more populated and controlled areas to the south.
Martin?
Yes?
I apologize for interrupting. It's 8:45. I thought I'd let you know.
I think I would thank you for that. I'm thinking that we'll talk a little bit here about, well, you know what? I think we'll just stop it right here with El Norte and talk about, and we'll start there next time. We never get as far as I hope to. That's because I talk too much. And there's an awful lot of stuff to go after on here. Here's an interesting thing for our last thing. This is a picture of the Palace of Governors in Santa Fe, which became the capital of the new Spanish capital of New Mexico, if you will. And the Palace of Governors was built in 1610, and it's the oldest government building in USA. I thought that was very interesting. And we'll just stop here, and we'll take questions, or we'll talk about it as people would like. Carolyn, do you have anything coming out of the chat?
David Coffey just put in some, the Norse people. I don't know, are you seeing that where it said the Norse people made 3 voyages to Canada in what is now Maine and Massachusetts and sailing down the East Coast? This is from whom the term down east came. They sailed to Baffin Bay, reached the Hudson Bay region on their second journey. On this journey, they moved from the Hudson Bay region to the area in southwest Minnesota. Some of them died from disease going through the area, during which a large portion of the Native Americans died. They returned to Canada in Massachusetts and Maine in the late 1200s. So that was
this is a lot of this is they're starting to be able to verify it. A lot of the original stories came out of the Norse sagas, and I keep saying the Vikings were here and a lot of other places where they haven't been admitted, and that's very true, David, and I agree. They came down into Minnesota from Hudson's Bay as well, so they hit Minnesota from both sides. Yeah, it's an interesting story, and it's one that's only now becoming generally known.
Michael Gordon's got his hand up. Go ahead, Michael, please.
Yeah, Martin, quick question. I thought that was very interesting. Is it true that many of the natives died from pestilence prior to the Pilgrims arriving?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
All that I was talking about, 90% of them were dead.
I just assumed it was caused by the people coming, but so you're saying
it was, but people had been coming to the East Coast for 100 years before the Pilgrims got there.
Oh, right. So it was still Europeans, but it was before the
earlier pestilence. See, for example, the 1616 through 1619 pestilence happened right before the Pilgrims got there.
Yeah.
They got there in 1621.
Huh.
And that's the reason they found an empty coastline and open fields, just because Patuxent had been wiped out.
Wow. Interesting.
Yep.
Johnny B?
Hey, y'all. Hey, Martin, did you ever come across anything about the expanse of the Spanish Empire, especially up through El Norte? And
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know. I never really followed much of the French holdings down through the middle. But anyway, my point was going to be
We're going to talk about that.
excellent, most excellent, sir. I can't remember everything from Collins's book, but I highly recommend that book, everybody. But anyway, somewhere along the line in my researches, I come across an interesting point that the Spanish Empire could not go any further north than Flathead Lake, Montana. But Montana, Wyoming, where Flathead Lake is. That was the furthest northern extent. And they knew that there was more resources, let's say, another word for it's gold, up that direction, but they wasn't sure where, and it was too costly for the Spanish Empire to invest into it. So what they did was they put that mission there, and the missionaries were able to move information on what was actually lying north up into the Great Plains. And that also lends into the story of what was the main resource from the Black Hills of the Dakotas. And all that stuff was known to the Native American people as being a valuable commodity if you could get it to the coast. Because the coast wasn't allowed to come to you because of the trade that had to go on between them. It's just the way free trade was going at that point in time. Right. I always thought that was a pretty critical thing, you know. They really broke into that frontier. I'm not sure when they got up into Montana and Wyoming proper, but I know that they were already prospecting for that gold that they were surveying out of California, way back there.
Well, the Spanish never did discover the gold in California.
Right. Well, the majority of it, but that was only because they were relying on the Native Americans to bring it to them, and the Native Americans were working by their standards by only giving what Mother Earth would give to them. Greatly restricted.
Yeah, and they also only gave it to the Spaniards when they had to, or when they had a reason to. Anyway,
just to point out that there was a vast worldwide trade going on the entire time of history, guys.
Oh, there always was,
time of history.
Yeah.
But they just convoluted it all together right there towards the end of World War II to make sure we didn't set back onto our haunches and think about being American again. We were still working for that almighty progress.
Well, that's a pretty big jump from Spanish Empire to World War II.
Yeah, not for me, brother. But anyway, thanks, Martin. I appreciate it.
Well, listen, I just wanted to add to the context here. When you're talking about the Spanish Empire going north from Mexico, it's a relatively late thing because they never could find any great Indian populations or riches up north. And they had tried a couple of times in the 1540s, didn't find anything. And by the time they were really getting into establishing missions up there, it was the 1700s. And the Spanish Empire was on its last legs because they had spent all their treasure fighting the Muslims in Europe and bankrolling the armies that eventually defeated the Ottomans outside of Vienna, Austria, in the 1620s and 1680s. And so there wasn't any money or personnel or resources left to do any more exploring and expanding. And that's why it was also so crippled and poverty-stricken in what became the United States, because they were on their last legs by the time they got to it. And we'll talk about that some more next time.
Great discussion, Martin. Great discussion. Cami, our new guest tonight, says, bringing back memories of historical details we were given in the 50s and 60s. I realize there are 60 more years of history to teach since then. Boy, isn't that true. You know, you really did bring us a lot of history here tonight. And, you know, we thank you all. We thank you all for just taking the time to join us. It's the passion. This isn't necessarily Tactical Civics stuff we're bringing, but we're members of Tactical Civics volunteering to educate so we can grow as members of Tactical Civics. The most important thing is when we get this mission accomplished, we have educated people. And that's every one of our passion. That's Michael's passion. That's Aaron and myself. It's Martin's. It's Patrick. It's the history that's really not been taught.
Yeah.
And we're teaching it now. It's so important. And we thank you all for joining us tonight. We hope that you go to Rumble and look up Patriot Penny and YouTube as well. There's some great videos there that we've been recording. I think we're on our 4th or 5th month here. I can't even keep track anymore. Aaron and myself are doing the monument next week. Looking forward to that. And this all fills in the blanks. It connects the biblical principles, the Constitution, the history, and this is what we have to learn to restore America. It's so important. And if we do this, then we keep on inviting people to come in and learn. We really, really, have so much learning to do. And if you haven't watched our kids, the Gen Z group, Garfield talks about it, I think in his first video, the attention span of a person anymore is about 9 seconds. It is pretty short, guys. We're used to just getting crumbs and that's it. So to sit and learn and educate yourself, it's a big deal. And that's the beautiful thing is these are all recorded and these are on our channels, our Rumble and our YouTube channels. Thank you again for joining. Been a member of Tactical Civics yet? Get over to tacticalcivics.com and check us out. We do have a mission and we have a solution for all the problems that are out there. And the only solution is we the people. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good night.
We stand on sacred ground, built on faith and truth. Our fathers paved the way with honor and with proof. By his grace we rise, united in our fight. To guard our promised land, we will shine the light. Jesus reigns above, guiding every hand. We keep the flame alive across this blessed land. One county at a time, we raise our voices strong. With Constitution firm, we right what's been wrong. In town halls we convene, hearts ready to defend. Built on Scripture's beam, our mission won't relent. Responsible and just, we answer to his call. Hand in hand we trust, and never shall we fall. Just half of 1%, united we advance. Chapters rise in towns and cities, seizing every chance. Across our proud republic, our banners call the name. Join our mission now, restore our founders' flame. From mountains to the coast, our message marches on. Steadfast in our duty, focused on God's Son. A spark in every county, a flame that won't resign. Together we prevail, in purpose we align. Oh, rise up, oh faithful ones, let freedom ring anew. Stand firm in righteous love in all that we pursue. Jesus reigns above, guiding every hand. We keep the flame alive across this blessed land. One county at a time, we raise our voices strong. With Constitution firm, we right what's been wrong. We march in faith and hope till his kingdom stands. Tactical and true, we guard these holy lands. Chapters build the future through every state and hall. Join Tactical Civics, answer freedom's call.